Welcome to the syntax unit of the linguistics course at Southern Utah University. This unit is going to focus on sentence structure and the need we have for sentence structure and word order in English. We'll first talk about word categories and try to bridge our discussion of morphology with our discussion of syntax. Then we'll talk about the need for sentence word order in languages like English that don't have a lot of inflection. And then we'll take a look at two different ways that linguists can use to better understand, study, and examine English syntax: tree diagrams and Reed-Kellogg diagrams. When we talked about morphology, we would have talked about form class words, which are sometimes thought as content class words, and the structure or function class words. The form class words are the words that have the most meaning in a sentence, and these are the nouns, verb, adjectives, adverbs primarily. Most of what we understand about what's happening in a sentence or the meaning of the sentence comes from the form class words. We've also mentioned that these are open class words, which means that there is the possibility to add new words to the language if they're form class words. We can always invent new nouns and verbs, adjectives, and our language allows for that. In contrast, we have our structure or function class words. These serve primarily a grammatical function in the language. They tell us about the relationships of the content words to each other, and then how we derive meaning about how those words function together. So these are primarily things like determiners, pronouns, conjunctions, and many other types of words. But these are generally closed class, which means that we're not inventing new conjunctions in the language or new articles. We just have a group and we just tend to stick with them, and that's it. We're not inventing new ones that can come in here. This is particularly interesting when we think about what's happening worldwide in the sense of non-binary gender and the desire for pronouns that don't maybe reveal male or female gender, or that allow for third gender. And there have been efforts to try and create maybe something new with this new neutral kind of gender pronoun. And it just hasn't taken off because pronouns are a structure class or a closed class. And so the idea of inventing new pronouns is just very hard to get a language community to accept that. So instead, what English has done is English has said, we already have a pronoun that we can use for third person, singular, gender neutral. And so that's why they, which had traditionally been a plural, can now also be used in the singular form. And we've been doing this for a long time in English. We've just now accepting that this is a formal method that we can use. And that's because pronouns are closed class, and we're just not accepting to inventing new ones. Here's a sentence in English. You can decide exactly how you want to do it. Take a look at the sentence and think for a moment. Which words in the sentence are form class or content class versus structure class or the function words? Where is the primary meaning? Which words are serving primarily a grammatical function? You can see that the main verb, decide, our adverb exactly, want, do, and then how, which functions adverbially here, can give us the main meaning of the sentence. Whereas the other ones are things like pronouns, auxiliary verbs, prepositions. They don't carry as much meaning in the sentence. And what's interesting is that when it comes to pronunciation, it's the content or those form class words that get pronounced the most clearly and slowly. That's where the sentence stress is. The other words tend to get kind of squished together. We speak them more fastly and slowly. So a fluent language speaker would probably say, you can decide exactly how you want to do it. And what happens is those words that we see here in the white text are said very quickly. It's very hard to hear them. That's why we end up with phrases like wanna do it. Okay? The want and the do are clear, but the to and the it are much weaker. Now look what happens if we decide in English, you know what, let's just be a little more creative and flexible with word order. And we end up with a sentence like, how decided exactly do want you to can you? It's hard for me to even say that sentence because it doesn't follow the patterns that we expect. And now, if we hadn't seen the original sentence, we might not even be able to guess what the meaning of the sentence is. This is because in English, we really depend on word order in order to gain meaning from the sentence. Not all languages are so heavily dependent on word order, but English is one of them. Here's another sentence. Experiences and through intellectually be students develop these able professionally types will too. Okay, we don't know what the original sentence is here. Now, if we spent enough time, we could study it out, and I think that we know enough about how word order should look in English, and some of these words we can reveal what their grammatical category is. We can see there's some endings for things like nouns and adverbs. So we could maybe piece this together because we know how things should fit together, but it takes a lot of work. And this is because English does not have very many inflectional morphemes. So we talked about, when we talk about morphology, inflection in English. And inflections are morphemes that we add that serve a grammatical function that tell us about the relationships of words. And English has lost most of these. Now we still do have some. It's interesting to look at the word I and me. One serves as a subject, one serves as an object. But we write them completely differently. And that's an example in English where we have maintained those inflectional morphemes as separate words. For example, if we have the sentence, the boy chased the dog, and we flip it, the dog chased the boy, word order really matters there. But instead, let's say it was, he chased the dog. Then when we flip it, it's the dog chased him. If we have the dog chased him and we switch those words around, we get him the dog chased. We can still guess the meaning there because him is telling us that that's the object of the sentence that's receiving the action. And if all of our nouns in English did this, word order wouldn't matter as much, but they don't. And so because of that, word order does matter. Some examples of highly inflected languages that maintain a lot of these inflections in their words that tell us about relationships of words in the sentence are Romance languages, particularly Latin. But even if you have studied modern Romance languages, Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, well, we can even see lots of inflections just on their on verbs. And sometimes you can drop the subject in some of these languages and we still know what the implied subject is because the verb looks different. Slavic languages as well, and Uralic languages. These are languages like Hungarian, Estonian, Finnish. These are highly, highly inflected languages. That's why they always say people who speak those languages, either you have to be a baby to learn how to talk like a native speaker, or sometimes they joke Mormon missionaries can figure it out too. But it just takes so much work to learn all of these inflections, how words have to have these morphemes added to them, depending on whether the word serves as a subject or an object, or how the verb is working, and so many different parts of the grammatical features of the language are embedded in terms of morphemes. Less inflected languages would be examples like English, but also Southeast Asian languages like Chinese. Word order matters in those languages. There's not very much inflection. And so this is just what languages have done. They've either used lots of inflections to help carry grammatical relationships between words, or then word order becomes highly important and very inflexible often because there's less inflection. So as we said, you got the choice. If you have more inflection, then word order, you have lots of freedom. If you have less inflection, then word order becomes really important. And that's generally the case in English. So the reason we would want to study syntax is that we want to understand relationships between words. How do the words work together to give us meaning? We also want to study syntax because it helps us understand what a language can do and what it cannot do, the things that are not possible to do with the language. And so syntax, linguists have developed syntactical tools to help us better understand how word order and relationships work. So we're going to take a look at two of these tools. One of them is tree diagrams, and the other one are the Reed-Kellogg diagrams. And with both of these different types of tools, the focus here is on different types of phrases in English. So we have words, and words work together in units called phrases, and then phrases work together to create sentences. And of course, sentences go beyond that to create discourse and dialogue and longer connected ways of bringing language together. But for these diagrams, we want to focus on understanding what are the phrases that make up sentences. So here's an example of a tree diagram. Some of you may have seen this before. At the top, we have an indicator that shows us we have a sentence. And most sentences are going to consist of a noun phrase and a verb phrase. And in English, we usually go with subject, verb, object. We sometimes say these are SVO, subject, verb, object languages. And so here's an example of one that has a subject and a verb. We don't have an object in this one. The boy walks. The is the determiner that's part of the noun phrase, the boy. And then we only have one part in our verb phrase, which is the main verb, walks. But it can get more complicated. So here's an example. Let's say we said that the boy walks the dog. Now we're going to add an object. This object is part of the verb phrase. Okay, it's what's being walked. We would say it's a noun phrase there coming off of the verb phrase, and it also has a determiner and a noun. So the boy walks the dog. We could also instead say, instead of saying using a transitive verb, the boy walks the dog, we could say the boy walks, but now we want to talk about maybe where he's going or how he's going or why he's going. And so we can, in this case, we would add a prepositional phrase. The boy walks to, with a preposition, and then now another noun phrase, the store, with the determiner and a noun. Tree diagrams can get really complicated. And these ones are not actually very complicated compared to how complicated they can get. If you're really interested in learning more, watch those videos about tree diagrams from our open textbook. But here's some examples. We put the box in the corner. So we've got our noun phrase and then a big verb phrase that has our main verb. We have an object, and then we have a prepositional phrase to describe where the object is being put. Then we have this next one. This is one of the interesting things about tree diagrams, is it can help us maybe overcome some ambiguity about oral English. So Barry Bonds hits the ball with a 30-ounce bat. And what's interesting is that with the 30-ounce bat, is that what he's using to hit it? Or is the 30-ounce bat part of the ball? Does the ball have it? Or is it his hitting has it? And this sentence clearly shows us that it's the hitting that has the bat, because the hit and the prepositional phrase with the 30 bounce at are at the same part or same level out of that verb phrase. If somehow the ball, if we were to say Barry Bonds hit the ball with the red stripe, well, with the red stripe would be part of that noun phrase, the ball with the red stripe, rather than the with being a prepositional phrase that's part of the verb phrase. In this particular sentence, it seems silly. Of course, the ball isn't going to have a 30-ounce bat. We can know that by understanding the culture and what that means. But let's instead take a look at the sentence of the pirate saw the soldier with the telescope. Who has the telescope? The pirate or the soldier? We don't know in this sentence. A tree diagram could help us. Another way to phrase this sentence would be the pirate with the telescope saw the soldier. But the pirate saw the soldier with the telescope. With the telescope, that phrase could move around and it could be connected to either one, but the tree diagram would show us that. So here's another type of way for analyzing sentences called the Reed-Kellogg Diagrams, okay, named after two linguists, Reed and Kellogg. And the idea here again is that we want to separate noun phrases from verb phrases. So our simplest sentence there, John slept, okay, we put everything on a horizontal line, and then we split our subject from the predicate. Okay, well, we think it was mainly our main noun phrase and our main verb phrase, and we split it by dissecting the horizontal line between the subject and the predicate. And we see another example here. This is one where we've got an object. Okay, Ellen needs something. She needs help. Well, in this case, we separate the verb phrase from the object, or with a line that doesn't cut all the way through the line. It just goes up to the horizontal line. On the bottom, we see two other examples. For the first one, I grew sleepy. There are some verbs in English that we think of as complementizer verbs. They kind of function like the word to be, and they tell what the subject of the sentence is. So I grew sleepy, it's like I am sleepy. And so we represent these ones slightly different. Instead of a vertical line between the verb and the object, or in this case complement, we use a slanted line. And that just reminds us that I am sleepy. They're kind of interchangeable. Sleepy am I am sleepy. The next one here, what we see here is that the object has the complement. So they made it. Okay, we could use that as a sentence by itself. You know, they constructed it. But they made it easy means that it, whatever it is they're making, is also easy. They made it easy. It is easy, and that they made it. Just as with tree diagrams, Reed-Kellogg diagrams can get a little more complicated. We can add things like prepositional phrases, determiners. Our first one there, the visitors from El Paso arrived on schedule. We can also add relative clauses, things that use which or who or that. The people who live on this street seem pleasant. We can also use these diagrams to indicate compound sentences, like this one that has a conjunction in the middle. The house looks tidy, but the yard is a mess. And so our goal here is just to see that there are tools that can be used to analyze syntax, and this can help us understand relationships between words and understand what's possible to do with the language and what's not, and how we can take these parts and use them to transform sentences into things like interrogative or question sentences. And again, if you're interested in more about this, you can watch those additional videos. There's other courses at SUU, the English Structure course, that really gets deep into Reed-Kellogg diagrams and helps you better understand how all those things are working together. But our main goal here was just to understand that there are different word categories, and that they do help us understand relationships between words as they form sentences. But because English doesn't have a lot of inflection, it relies primarily on word order to make the sentence meaning. And we looked at those two tools, tree diagrams and Reed-Kellogg diagrams, to better understand how English syntax works.